In the cold depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that every species learns too late: never underestimate the quiet ones. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had dismissed Earth as a backwater planet, home to a young species barely worth acknowledging. Humans were seen as crude, violent, and utterly unremarkable, just another collection of primitives playing with fire and calling it progress. But when the Zarathi horde descended from the void with ships that blotted out stars and weapons that turned planets to glass, when the mighty Valkorian Empire fell in a single day, when the ancient Zephyrian Confederacy's billion-year reign crumbled to ash, the Council made a desperate choice that would echo through the galaxy forever. They sent a single, encrypted message across the void: help us. What answered that call would teach the universe a lesson it would never forget. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that's been holding back. And humanity? Humanity had been holding back for a very, very long time. The galaxy was about to discover why humans called their homeworld a deathworld, and why that was the least terrifying thing about them. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 hours, and Ambassador THYSS could feel her third heart beginning to flutter with exhaustion. Around the massive circular chamber, representatives from 1,200 species sat in growing desperation as the holographic displays showed the same horrifying truth: the Zarathi were winning. THYSS watched the tactical readouts with mounting horror. The Valkorian 7th Fleet, pride of the galaxy's most militant species, had been obliterated in less than 6 hours. 3 billion Valkorians, beings bred for war and conquest, reduced to expanding plasma clouds. The Zephyrian home systems, protected by gravitational weapons that could tear apart moons, had fallen silent one by one. Civilizations that had stood for millions of years were being swept away like sandcastles before a tsunami. The Outer Rim colonies have gone dark, reported General Korth, his usually booming voice reduced to a whisper. The massive Krulon's forearms trembled as he manipulated the holographic interface. We've lost contact with the Meridian Sector, the Helix territories, and the entire frontier zone. That's 400 billion souls. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. 400 billion. The number was so vast it felt abstract, meaningless. THYSS forced herself to remember that each digit represented countless lives, families, children, dreams, all snuffed out by the advancing darkness. Counselor Vexthran, the ancient being who had guided the council for over 8 centuries, rose slowly from her crystalline throne. Her translucent form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of deep distress. The Zarathi horde has been dormant for 50,000 years, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the translator implants struggle. Our ancestors believed them extinct, destroyed by their own violent nature. We were wrong. The main display shifted, showing the enemy in all their terrifying glory. The Zarathi ships were nothing like the elegant curves and graceful lines of council vessels. They were angular, brutal things that looked more like geometric nightmares than spacecraft. Each one was massive, some dwarfing entire moons, their surfaces covered in weapons that defied current understanding of physics. But it wasn't their ships that made seasoned warriors wake screaming from their sleep. It was what the ships carried. Intelligence reports indicate the Zarathi themselves have changed, continued Vexthran. The historical records show they were once bipedal, roughly humanoid in form. But these new readings suggest something far worse. They appear to have embraced biological modification beyond recognition. Our scouts describe creatures that seem to be part machine, part organic horror. They don't just conquer worlds, they consume them, incorporate them, make them part of their collective. Ambassador THYSS felt her stomach clench. The Zarathi weren't just invaders, they were a plague. Every world they touched became part of their growing mass, every civilization they encountered added to their strength. It was exponential growth through destruction, and they were accelerating. What about our defenses? Asked Senator Analvar, the Procyon representative. His species was known for their military engineering, builders of some of the galaxy's most formidable fortifications. The Meridian Line was supposed to hold them for months. General Korth's expression was grim. The Meridian Line lasted 47 minutes. Their weapons, we don't understand them. They don't just destroy matter, they seem to unmake it at the quantum level. Our shields, our armor, our most advanced defensive systems might as well be paper. A young aide rushed to Korth's side, whispering urgently. The general's face went pale, his secondary eyes dilating in shock. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the silent chamber like a death knell. "I've just received confirmation from long-range sensors," Korth announced. "The Zarathi vanguard has broken through the spiral arm defenses. At their current rate of advance." He paused, running calculations on his tactical display. "They will reach Council core space in 37 days. The silence that followed was deafening. Council core space contained the heart of galactic civilization, over 2 trillion beings across 400 worlds. The accumulated knowledge, art, and culture of 1,000 species. Everything they had built over millions of years. "There has to be something," insisted Senator Nalvar. "Some weapon, some tactic we haven't tried. What about the Astralheim archives? The Void Walkers? The Quantum Citadel?" "All gone," Korth replied flatly. "The Void Walkers lasted the longest, 3 days. Their ability to phase between dimensions meant nothing when the Zarathi deployed their entropy weapons. As for the Quantum Citadel," he gestured helplessly, "it simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged. It just stopped being." Counselor Vexthran moved to the central console, her movements betraying her age and growing desperation. "We must consider all options, no matter how unlikely. Are there any species we haven't contacted? Any civilizations that might possess unknown capabilities?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For millennia, the Galactic Council had prided itself on cataloging every sentient species, every technological civilization, every possible source of knowledge or power. They were the galaxy's greatest achievement, the ultimate expression of cooperation and unity. But, as species after species reported their complete inability to even slow the Zarathi advance, the awful truth became clear: they had never faced anything like this before. "What about the isolationist species?" suggested Ambassador THYSS, grasping at straws. "The reclusive ones in the dark nebula? The Machine Collective?" "Already contacted," Vexthran replied. The Machine Collective calculated their survival odds and immediately began evacuation protocols. The reclusive ones, their last transmission was a mathematical proof demonstrating the impossibility of victory. The chamber fell into another crushing silence. Outside the great viewing windows, THYSS could see the lights of the Council fleet, thousands of ships representing the combined might of galactic civilization. It should have been a reassuring sight, a reminder of their collective strength. Instead, knowing what they faced, the fleet looked pitifully small. "Wait," said a voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Junior Archivist Realm, a young Eltarian who rarely spoke in sessions. His pale blue skin was flushed with excitement or terror. With his species, it was hard to tell the difference. "There might be one option we haven't explored." "Speak," commanded Vexthran. Realm nervously activated his datapad, projecting a star chart into the chamber's central display. A small, unremarkable yellow star appeared, located in one of the galaxy's spiral arms. Surrounding it was a sparse collection of worlds, most showing as barely habitable on the scanner readings. "The Sol system," Realm said, his voice gaining strength. "It's home to a species called humans. They achieved faster-than-light travel about 50 years ago, but they've remained largely isolated. We've had minimal contact, a few trade agreements, some cultural exchanges. Most council members consider them primitive." A ripple of confused murmurs ran through the assembly. Several representatives were actually laughing, quiet, bitter sounds that spoke of minds pushed too far by desperation and fear. "You're suggesting we contact a species that's barely achieved interstellar flight?" Senator Nalvar's voice dripped with disbelief. "When the combined might of civilizations spanning millions of years has failed utterly?" "I know how it sounds," Realm replied, his confidence wavering but not breaking. "But there's something unusual about the human homeworld. It's classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, one of the most hostile environments known to harbor intelligent life. The gravity is crushing, the atmosphere is corrosive, the biosphere is incredibly aggressive. Most Council species require extensive life support just to visit the surface. And, this is supposed to help us how? Demanded General Korth. Because, Reln said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, humans evolved there. They didn't just survive on a death world, they thrived on it. They became the apex predators of one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. And, when they achieved spaceflight, they didn't terraform worlds to suit them. They adapted themselves to survive anywhere. The chamber had grown completely quiet now, all laughter dead. THYSS felt a strange chill running down her spine as she studied the data about Earth. The atmospheric composition alone should have been lethal to most known life forms. The geological instability was off the charts. The native life forms showed aggressive adaptation that bordered on the impossible. There's more, Reln continued, emboldened by the attention. Human military doctrine is unusual. Most species develop warfare as an extension of their natural behaviors. Hive minds create vast, coordinated strategies. Predator species focus on overwhelming individual superiority. But, humans developed something different. He brought up another display, showing fragments of human military history that had been gathered during their initial contact periods. Images of massive conflicts, strategies that seemed to defy logic, weapons designed with a creativity that was both brilliant and terrifying. They call it asymmetric warfare, Reln explained. When faced with superior enemies, they don't attempt direct confrontation. They adapt, they improvise, they find weaknesses that others miss. Their entire military philosophy is based on the assumption that they will be outgunned, outmanned, and outmatched. So they become experts at winning impossible fights. THYSS found herself leaning forward, caught up in the young archivist's presentation despite herself. What kind of weapons do they possess? That's the interesting part, Reln replied, manipulating his controls to show technical specifications. By our standards, their technology is primitive. Kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, basic energy projection. But, they use them in ways that are creative. And, there are reports that they've been developing something they call adaptive technologies, weapons and systems designed to counter unknown threats. This is madness, Senator Enalvar declared. We're talking about contacting primitives who still use chemical propulsion for some of their spacecraft. But, Counselor Vexthran was studying the data with growing interest. Her bioluminescent patterns had shifted to colors THYSS had never seen before, complex emotions that the translator couldn't interpret. Archivist Reln, Vexthran said slowly, you said they've remained largely isolated. Why? Most species seek contact and trade once they achieve interstellar capability. According to our cultural attaches, Reln replied, they're still dealing with internal conflicts. But, there's something else. They've apparently been monitoring galactic communications for decades. They know about the Council, about the various species and conflicts. But, they've chosen to remain on the periphery, watching and learning. Watching and learning, Vexthran repeated thoughtfully. How long have they been aware of the Zarathi threat? Reln checked his data. Based on communication intercepts, approximately 6 months. They've been tracking the Horde's advance through their long-range sensor networks. The implications of that statement hit the chamber like a physical force. The humans had been watching the greatest military powers in the galaxy fall one by one, had seen weapons and strategies that defied understanding, had observed the complete failure of every known defensive measure. And, they had remained silent. Either they're paralyzed with fear, General Korth said slowly, or they're preparing, finished THYSS. Vexthran moved back to her throne, her ancient form seeming to carry the weight of every fallen world. The question becomes, are we desperate enough to contact a species we know almost nothing about, to ask for help from beings we've consistently dismissed as primitive? The answer came not from words, but from the tactical display that suddenly flashed red. New contacts had appeared on the edge of Council space, hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation toward the core worlds. The Zarathi had accelerated their timeline. General Korth's voice was hollow as he read the projections. At this speed, they'll reach the core worlds in 12 days, not 37. 12 days. THYSS felt the number settling into her consciousness like a weight. 12 days to evacuate 2 trillion beings. 12 days to preserve the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilization. 12 days to find a miracle. All in favor of contacting the humans, Vexthran said quietly, indicate now. The vote was unanimous. As Junior Archivist Relm began preparing the transmission equipment, THYSS found herself staring at the small yellow star on the display. Such an insignificant system, home to beings that most of the galaxy considered barely above barbarism. But something about the way Relm had described them, their planet, their adaptive nature, made her wonder if they were missing something fundamental. The humans had survived and thrived on a world that would kill most galactic species within minutes. They had developed military doctrines based on being perpetually outmatched. They had observed the fall of civilizations that dwarfed their own and chosen to remain hidden in the shadows. Perhaps, THYSS thought as the communication array powered up to send humanity's first official distress call, perhaps there was more to the quiet species from the Deathworld than anyone had imagined. The message was simple, direct, and carried the weight of 2 trillion desperate souls. This is the Galactic Council. Our civilization is under attack by an enemy we cannot defeat. We are requesting immediate assistance. Please help us. As the transmission shot across space toward the small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, none of them could have imagined what their call for help would ultimately unleash upon the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, watching the Earth rotate slowly below. The blue marble that had spawned humanity looked peaceful from this distance, but Sarah knew better. She had grown up on the surface, had felt the crushing gravity that would flatten most alien visitors, had breathed air that would corrode the respiratory systems of dozens of galactic species. Earth wasn't peaceful, it was constantly trying to kill everything on it, and that had made humans into something unique in the galaxy. Behind her, the emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council was reaching its crescendo. Representatives from every major nation and colony were present, their voices raised in heated debate as they struggled to process the message that had arrived 6 hours ago. The first official distress call from the Galactic Council, begging for help against an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations spanning millions of years. This is obviously a trap, declared General Harrison, his weathered face grim with suspicion. Think about it logically. The same aliens who've ignored us for 50 years suddenly want our help. Right when we finally achieved military parity with some of the minor galactic powers? A trap implies they have something to gain, countered Dr. Elizabeth Vesquez, the Defense Council's chief xenobiologist. The energy signature of that transmission alone represents more power than our entire global grid produces in a year. If they wanted to destroy us, they wouldn't need elaborate deceptions. Admiral Chen turned from the viewport, her augmented eyes automatically adjusting to the chamber's lighting. At 45, she was young for someone commanding humanity's first interstellar fleet, but her experience in the Centauri conflicts had proven that age meant little when facing the unknown. The scars running along the left side of her face, souvenirs from a Regellian plasma cannon, were a constant reminder that the galaxy was not a friendly place. General Harrison raises valid concerns, Chen said, her voice cutting through the arguments. But we've been monitoring galactic communications for months. The Zarathi threat is real, and it's unprecedented. Every military simulation we've run confirms that the established galactic powers are completely outmatched. She gestured to the main display, which showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with red markers indicating fallen civilizations. The pattern was clear and terrifying, a wave of destruction rolling inexorably toward the galactic core, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The Valkorian Empire fell in 6 hours, Chen continued. These are the same beings who fought a 3-century war against the Zephyrian Confederacy and emerged victorious. Their military technology is centuries ahead of ours, their soldiers are literally bred for warfare, and they lasted less than a single day. Which brings us back to the question, interrupted Director Kim Nakamura, the head of the Advanced Warfare Division. What could we possibly offer that the combined might of galactic civilization cannot provide? It was the question that had been haunting the chamber since the message arrived. On paper, humanity was laughably outmatched. Their fastest ships could barely achieve light speed, while galactic vessels routinely traveled at factors that made interstellar distances trivial. Their weapons were kinetic and chemical-based, primitive compared to the energy manipulators and matter converters used by advanced species. Their military consisted of a few million soldiers spread across a handful of systems, while galactic powers commanded armies in the billions. But Admiral Chen had spent her entire career studying the galaxy's various species and their military doctrines, and she had begun to notice something that troubled her. For all their advanced technology, for all their vast resources and ancient wisdom, the galactic powers had never truly faced an adaptive enemy. Display Tactical Analysis 77 Alpha, Chen commanded. The hologram shifted, showing detailed breakdowns of major galactic conflicts over the past 1,000 years. Battle formations appeared and vanished, ship movements traced elegant patterns through space, weapons fired in precise, predictable patterns.
Notice anything? Chen asked.
The chambers studied the displays in silence.
Finally, Dr. Vasquez spoke up. Their tactics are formal. Almost ritualized.
Exactly, Chen replied. Every galactic species we've observed follows strict military doctrines based on their evolutionary advantages. Hive minds create vast, coordinated strategies that are brilliant in their complexity but absolutely predictable once you understand the underlying logic. Predator species rely on individual superiority and direct confrontation.
Even the most advanced artificial intelligences follow mathematical optimization models.
She gestured to a particular battle sequence.
Look at this engagement between the Krulon hegemony and the Stellar Consortium.
15 ships per side, arranged in perfect geometric formations, firing at optimal ranges with weapons designed for maximum efficiency. It's beautiful, logical, and completely inflexible.
The Zarathi are different, asked General Harrison.
The Zarathi are something none of them have ever encountered, Chen replied.
An enemy that doesn't follow the rules. Their weapons don't just destroy, they unmake matter at the quantum level.
Their ships move in formations that should be impossible. They adapt their strategies faster than their opponents can respond.
She paused, letting the implications sink in. But we've been fighting adaptive enemies our entire history.
Every conflict on Earth was against opponents who could think, who could learn, who could change their tactics mid-battle.
We didn't develop formal military doctrines, we developed principles of adaptation. Director Nakamura leaned forward. You're suggesting our primitive military technology might actually be an advantage?
I'm suggesting that our military philosophy might be what they need, Chen corrected. Consider this, the Zarathi have been dormant for 50,000 years. When they returned, they encountered civilizations using technologies and strategies that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia.
The Zarathi adapted to fight those enemies.
But they've never encountered anyone like us.
The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Humanity's greatest weakness, their technological inferiority, might actually be their greatest strength.
They had never had the luxury of overwhelming firepower or unassailable defenses. They had learned to win through cunning, adaptation, and the willingness to embrace tactics that others would consider impossible or insane. There's something else, Chen continued, pulling up another display. We've been monitoring Zarathi communications for the past month. Their tactical doctrines show clear patterns, specific rhythms to their attacks. They're adaptable, yes, but they're still following recognizable strategies. They've learned to counter galactic military thinking, but they've never encountered human military thinking.
Which is what, exactly? Asked Dr. Vasquez. Chen smiled grimly. Chaos theory applied to warfare.
The understanding that in any conflict, the most important factor isn't the size of your guns or the thickness of your armor, it's your ability to make your enemy's advantages irrelevant.
She gestured to another display, showing historical human conflicts.
The Battle of Thermopylae.
300 Spartans holding off an army of hundreds of thousands by choosing terrain that negated numerical advantage.
The Vietnam War, where technological superiority meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight conventional battles. The Centauri conflicts, where we defeated enemy ships 10 times our size by using their own momentum against them.
And, you think this philosophy can work against an enemy that's destroyed civilizations spanning millions of years? General Harrison's skepticism was evident. I think it's the only thing that hasn't been tried yet, Chen replied. Every species that's faced the Zarathi has attempted to match them strength for strength, technology for technology. And every one of them has failed because that's exactly what the Zarathi have adapted to defeat. Director Nakamura was studying the tactical displays with growing interest. What would you need to make this work? Shen had been hoping for that question.
For months, she had been developing contingency plans based on intercepted intelligence about the Zarathi threat. What she had in mind was ambitious, dangerous, and would require resources that humanity had never committed to a single operation. First, we need to mobilize the entire defense fleet, she began. Every ship, every station, every piece of military hardware we've developed. But, more importantly, we need to deploy them in ways that the Zarathi won't expect. She activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional representation of the galactic core region. The Zarathi advance follows predictable patterns. They target major population centers and military installations first, using their superior firepower to destroy organized resistance. Then, they move on to smaller targets, absorbing them into their collective. So we don't give them major targets, said Dr. Vasquez, understanding immediately. Exactly, Chen confirmed. We disperse our forces into small, independent units. Each one capable of operating autonomously, each one equipped with adaptive technologies that can respond to whatever the Zarathi deploy. No central command structure for them to destroy, no predictable formations for them to counter. Guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale, mused General Harrison. More than that, Chen replied. Asymmetric warfare designed specifically to exploit their adaptive capabilities against them. Every time they adapt to one of our tactics, we shift to something completely different. Keep them constantly off balance, force them to waste resources responding to threats that disappear before they can properly counter them. Director Nakamura was running calculations on his personal display. The resource requirements would be enormous. We're talking about retrofitting our entire fleet, developing new technologies on a timeline of days rather than years, and coordinating operations across multiple star systems. Which brings us to the second requirement, Chen said. We need to accelerate our military development program by a factor of 10. Every adaptive technology we've been testing, every experimental weapon system, every piece of theoretical research, all of it needs to be operational within a week. Impossible, declared General Harrison. Some of those projects are decades from completion. Under normal circumstances, yes, Chen agreed. But, we're not operating under normal circumstances anymore. We have the technical specifications for advanced galactic technologies from our monitoring operations. We have manufacturing capabilities that were designed for rapid expansion. And, we have something no other species possesses, the ability to embrace solutions that seem impossible. She pulled up another display, showing humanity's current military assets. On paper, it looked pathetic compared to galactic standards. A few hundred ships, most of them small and lightly armed. Ground forces that relied on tactics and equipment that would have been familiar to soldiers from centuries past. Defense installations that were innovative but laughably primitive by galactic standards. But Chen saw something different. She saw technologies designed for adaptability rather than raw power. Ships built for speed and maneuverability rather than overwhelming firepower. Weapons systems that could be modified and upgraded in the field. Soldiers trained to think independently rather than follow rigid doctrines. The third requirement, she continued, is full integration with whatever galactic forces remain. We're not trying to replace their military capabilities, we're trying to provide what they've never had. The ability to fight an adaptive enemy using tactics that the enemy has never encountered. And if we're wrong, asked Dr. Vasquez quietly. If human military doctrine isn't the answer they need? Chen looked out the viewport at Earth rotating below, thinking of the billions of humans who had no idea their species was about to enter the greatest conflict in galactic history. She thought of the children in the surface cities, breathing air that would poison most galactic species, living under gravity that would crush their bones. She thought of the colonists on Mars, carving out an existence on a world that was hostile to human life, adapting and thriving because that's what humans did. Then, we die fighting, she said simply. just like every other species that's faced the Zarathi. But, if we're right, if our approach can give the galaxy what it needs to survive, then we'll have done something no other species has managed in 50,000 years, we'll have stopped them. The vote was unanimous, though Chen suspected it had more to do with desperation than confidence. Within hours, mobilization orders were going out across human space. Every ship would be retrofitted with the most advanced adaptive technologies humanity could produce. Every soldier would receive training in asymmetric warfare techniques. Every installation would be prepared for the kind of conflict that the galaxy had never seen. As the chamber emptied and the representatives rushed to implement the most ambitious military operation in human history, Admiral Chan remained at the viewport, watching her homeworld turn slowly in the darkness. In 12 days, humanity would either prove that Deathworld evolution had created something unique in the galaxy, or they would join the countless civilizations that had already fallen to the Zarathi horde. But, for the first time since the alien message had arrived, Chen felt something approaching optimism. The galaxy had tried to fight the Zarathi with overwhelming force and had failed. They had tried to match alien technology with alien technology and had been destroyed. Now it was time to try something different. It was time to fight the Zarathi with human methods, human tactics, and the kind of stubborn, adaptive insanity that had allowed humanity to thrive on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. The message going back to the Galactic Council was simple: help is coming. Prepare for asymmetric operations. What neither the Council nor the Zarathi could have imagined was exactly what that would mean when it came from the quiet species from the Deathworld. The first human ship to arrive at the Galactic Council's defense perimeter was nothing like what Ambassador THYSS had expected. Instead of the sleek, efficient designs favored by most species, the vessel looked like it had been assembled from spare parts in someone's garage. Hull plating of different metals created a patchwork appearance, weapon systems seemed to have been bolted on as afterthoughts, and the entire ship gave off an aura of barely controlled chaos. "That's their flagship?" General Korth asked incredulously, his forearms gesturing at the tactical display. The human vessel was dwarfed by the surrounding council ships, appearing almost comically small next to the kilometer-long dreadnoughts that represented the finest military technology in the galaxy. "UEDS determination," reported the communications officer. "They're requesting permission to dock and transfer personnel for tactical consultation." THYSS found herself studying the vessel more carefully. Despite its chaotic appearance, the ship's movements were precise, controlled. It slipped through the defensive formation with an ease that suggested exceptional pilot skills and reaction times. More interesting, her sensors were detecting energy signatures that didn't match any known technology, not more powerful than Council systems, but different in ways that made her neural implants struggle to categorize them. "Permission granted," Counselor Vexthran announced. "Dock them at Bay 7 and escort their representatives to the tactical center immediately. We have less than 10 days. The human delegation consisted of 3 individuals who looked even more out of place than their ship. The leader was a woman of middle age with scarring on one side of her face that spoke of personal combat experience, a rarity among galactic species who had long ago moved beyond physical conflict. She wore a uniform that was functional rather than ceremonial, with equipment harnesses that suggested someone who expected to use her gear rather than simply display it. Behind her walked 2 companions who represented human diversity in ways that surprised THYSS. One was a tall man whose skin had been modified with what appeared to be cybernetic interfaces, primitive by galactic standards, but integrated in ways that suggested genuine fusion of biology and technology. The other was a woman whose appearance had been so heavily modified that determining her original human characteristics was impossible. Adaptive evolution in action, THYSS realized. "Admiral Sarah Chen, United Earth Defense Forces," the leader announced, her voice carrying an accent that THYSS's translator identified as originating from Earth's eastern continental regions. "This is Commander Marcus Webb, Adaptive Systems Division, and Lieutenant Colonel Julia Santos, Xenological Warfare Specialist." "Welcome to what remains of galactic civilization," Vexthran replied, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that spoke of both hope and desperation. "We appreciate your response to our call for assistance, though I confess we're uncertain what aid a single ship might provide against an enemy that has destroyed our greatest fleets." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but THYSS caught a glint in the human's eyes that reminded her of predators she had observed on various worlds, the look of something that had spotted prey. One ship is just the beginning, Chen replied. We've been monitoring Zarathi communications and tactical patterns for the past week. Before we commit our full resources, we need to understand exactly what you've tried and why it failed. General Korth activated the tactical display, showing the progression of Zarathi victories across the galaxy. As you can see, they advance in coordinated waves, targeting major military installations first. Their ships appear to be equipped with weapons that operate on quantum disruption principles. They don't just destroy matter, they unmake it at the subatomic level. Defensive strategies, asked Commander Webb, his cybernetic interfaces flickering as he interfaced directly with the data stream. We've attempted everything, Korth replied. Energy shields, matter displacement, dimensional phasing, quantum isolation fields. Nothing provides more than momentary protection. Their weapons adapt to counter our defenses faster than we can develop new ones. Lieutenant Colonel Santos stepped forward, her heavily modified features studying the tactical readouts with interest that seemed almost hungry. What about offensive strategies? Have you attempted to target their adaptive capabilities directly? We don't understand their adaptive capabilities well enough to target them, Vextran admitted. They appear to operate through some form of collective intelligence that allows instantaneous sharing of tactical information across their entire force. When one ship encounters a new defensive strategy, every ship in their fleet immediately develops countermeasures. Admiral Chen was nodding slowly, her scarred face showing the kind of concentration that THYSS associated with tactical minds processing complex problems. Show us the Zarathi fleet composition and formation patterns. The display shifted, showing the geometric nightmares that were Zarathi vessels arranged in formations that hurt to look at directly. The ships moved in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles that galactic sensors could detect but not understand. Fascinating, Chen murmured. They're using adaptive formation tactics, but they're still following recognizable strategic principles. Commander Webb, what's your assessment of their command structure? The cybernetically enhanced human's interfaces flickered more rapidly as he processed the data. Distributed processing with hierarchical override capabilities. Each ship operates semi-independently but can be coordinated through the collective network. It's efficient, but it has potential vulnerabilities. Explain, demanded General Korth. Any system that relies on shared information can be compromised if you feed it false information, Webb replied. The more sophisticated the system, the more vulnerable it becomes to data corruption. If we could introduce chaotic elements into their tactical processing, we might be able to disrupt their adaptive capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Santos was studying different aspects of the data. Their formation patterns show clear optimization for maximum firepower concentration and minimal vulnerability to conventional attack vectors. But they're assuming their opponents will follow standard military doctrine. And you won't? Asked THYSS. Santos's modified features shifted in what might have been a smile. Admiral, we've never followed standard anything. Standard doctrine gets you killed when you're fighting enemies with superior firepower. Admiral Chan moved to the central console, her hands moving over the controls with familiarity that surprised everyone present. THYSS realized the human had been studying galactic technology during the journey to the Council fleet, more evidence of the adaptive capabilities that had caught Archivist Realm's attention. We need to see their response patterns in real time, Chen announced. Are there any active engagements currently taking place? The Outer Rim Defense Fleet is making a final stand at the Helix Nebula, General Korth replied grimly. They're outnumbered 50-1, but they're buying time for civilian evacuations. Show us the engagement, Chen ordered. The main display switched to a live feed from the battle, and THYSS felt her third heart flutter with distress. The scene was one of desperate heroism and inevitable defeat. Council ships, graceful even in their death throes, were being systematically destroyed by Zarathi vessels that moved like geometric predators through the nebulous gas clouds. But the humans were watching with different eyes. While everyone else saw defeat, they were analyzing tactics, formation changes, response patterns. They watched ships die with the cold calculation of scientists studying a particularly interesting experiment. "There," said Commander Webb suddenly. "Ship designation 77 Alpha just modified its formation in response to the Council fleet's defensive maneuver. Watch the data flow patterns." On the display, subtle energy signatures showed information being shared across the Zarathi fleet. Within moments, every enemy ship had adjusted its tactics to counter the Council's desperate strategy. "Collective adaptation," Chen observed. "But, notice the transmission delay? 0.73 seconds between tactical innovation and fleet implementation. That's our window." 0.73 seconds? General Korth's voice was incredulous. How could anyone exploit such a tiny tactical window? "By not fighting the way they expect," Lieutenant Colonel Santos replied. "Standard galactic doctrine emphasizes careful planning, logical progression, tactical elegance. You fight the way you think: organized, rational, predictable. The Zarathi have adapted to counter rational tactics." "So we fight irrationally?" Vexthran asked. "Not irrationally," Admiral Chen corrected. "Chaotically. There's a difference. Chaos theory teaches us that complex systems can be disrupted by introducing small, unpredictable variables at critical moments. We don't need to overpower their adaptive capabilities, we need to overwhelm them with more variables than they can process simultaneously." She turned to address the assembled council representatives. "Your species have spent millions of years perfecting the art of organized warfare. You've created military doctrines that are masterpieces of efficiency and logic. But efficiency and logic are exactly what the Zarathi have learned to defeat." "What do you propose?" asked THYSS, finding herself drawn into the humans' tactical thinking despite her misgivings. "Organized chaos," Chen replied. "We're going to hit them with everything they've never seen before, faster than they can adapt to it. Tactics that violate every principle of efficient warfare. Strategies that make no sense from a logical standpoint but achieve tactical objectives through unexpected means." Commander Webb was interfacing with the Council's tactical computers, downloading formation patterns and strategic databases. "We'll need to coordinate with your remaining fleets, but not in the way you're used to. Instead of unified command structures, we'll create independent tactical cells that can operate without central coordination." "Autonomous units?" General Korth was clearly struggling with the concept. "How can you coordinate complex strategies without central command?" "You don't," Santos explained. "Each unit operates according to general principles but adapts its tactics in real time based on immediate tactical requirements. The overall strategy emerges from the collective actions of independent units, rather than being imposed from above." THYSS felt a chill of understanding. What the humans were proposing wasn't just a different military strategy, it was a complete inversion of everything the galaxy understood about organized warfare. Instead of trying to match Zarathi adaptive capabilities, they wanted to out-adapt them by embracing tactical chaos as a weapon. "This could work," Vexthran said slowly, her bioluminescent pattern shifting to colors THYSS had never seen before. "But it would require every surviving fleet to abandon military doctrines that our species have developed over millions of years." "It would require trust," Chen agreed. "Trust that soldiers and ship commanders can make correct tactical decisions without detailed orders. Trust that chaos can be more effective than order when fighting an enemy that has learned to counter order." "And if you're wrong?" asked General Korth. Admiral Chen looked at the tactical display showing the battle at Helix Nebula, where Council ships continued to die with heartbreaking heroism. "Then, we lose the same way you've been losing. But, at least we'll have tried something different." The debate that followed lasted 4 hours, with representatives from dozens of species arguing the merits and dangers of abandoning proven military strategies in favor of human tactical chaos. But, in the end, the deciding factor wasn't logic or military theory, it was desperation. The Zarathi advance had accelerated again. They would reach the core worlds in 7 days. "All in favor of implementing human tactical doctrine," Vexthran announced. The vote wasn't unanimous this time. Several species chose to continue with traditional strategies, unwilling to abandon the military cultures that defined them.
But, enough voted in favor to provide Admiral Chen with the combined fleets of 63 different civilizations. What happened next would have been impossible for any single species to accomplish. Human tactical specialists spread throughout the surviving fleets, carrying portable adaptive technology systems and training manuals that had been written during the journey to Council space. Ship commanders who had spent centuries perfecting formal battle tactics found themselves learning to embrace controlled chaos as a weapon. Weapons systems were modified not for maximum efficiency, but for unpredictable performance characteristics. Ship formations were designed to shift and change randomly rather than maintain optimal positioning. Communication protocols were rewritten to emphasize improvisation over coordination. As Admiral Chen prepared to lead the most unconventional military force in galactic history against an enemy that had never been defeated, she felt the familiar tension that preceded every battle. But, this time, there was something else, a sense that humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about the power of adaptive evolution and the strength that came from refusing to fight fair. "Signal all units," she commanded as the combined fleet moved toward the Zarathi advance. "Remember, we're not trying to beat them at their own game. We're going to force them to play ours." The galaxy was about to discover what happened when Deathworld tactics met an enemy that had never learned to counter organized chaos. The first engagement between the human-led combined fleet and the Zarathi horde took place in the neutral zone between the spiral arms, where space itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, now designated as the UEDS Chaos Theory, watching as her unconventional fleet took positions that would have horrified any traditional military strategist. Instead of the elegant formations that had characterized galactic warfare for millennia, Chen's forces spread out in patterns that seemed random, almost scattered. Ships maintained irregular spacing, moved in unpredictable vectors, and carried weapon loads that violated every principle of tactical efficiency. To any observer familiar with standard military doctrine, it looked less like a battle fleet and more like a collection of confused vessels that had lost their way. But Admiral Chen had not spent months studying Zarathi tactical patterns to recreate the mistakes of the fallen civilizations. Every aspect of her fleet's seemingly chaotic deployment was carefully calculated to present the enemy with problems they had never encountered before. "Zarathi advance force detected," reported Lieutenant Commander Harrison from the sensor station. His voice carried the tension that gripped everyone present. This would be the first test of whether human tactical doctrine could actually work against an enemy that had proven unstoppable. The enemy formation appeared on the main display, and even Chen felt a moment of visceral intimidation. 37 Zarathi vessels moved in perfect geometric precision, their angular hulls bristling with weapons that had unmade matter at the quantum level. Each ship was a floating nightmare of mathematical malevolence, and together they formed a pattern that seemed to pulse with predatory intelligence. "Analysis?" Chen asked, though her own enhanced vision was already processing the enemy formation. Commander Webb, his cybernetic interfaces flickering rapidly as he processed the incoming data, replied without looking up from his console. "Classic Zarathi adaptive assault formation. They're configured to identify and counter any defensive strategy we deploy within their 0.73-second adaptation window. They expect us to arrange our forces in optimal defensive positions, then they'll modify their approach to nullify our advantages. Time to contact? 14 minutes at current approach vectors." Chen nodded and activated the fleet-wide communication system. What she was about to order went against every military instinct that galactic civilization had developed over millions of years of organized warfare. "All units, this is Admiral Chen. Execute pattern Omega 7. Remember, the objective isn't to win elegantly, it's to confuse them long enough for their adaptation protocols to overload. Individual ship commanders have full tactical autonomy. Make them wonder what the hell we're doing, because honestly, half the time we don't know either." The response was immediate and would have looked like complete chaos to any traditional observer. Council ships that had maintained perfect formations for centuries suddenly began moving in seemingly random directions. Weapon systems charged and discharged in patterns that served no apparent tactical purpose. Some ships accelerated toward the enemy while others retreated, and a few began moving in spirals that defied any logical explanation. Ambassador THYSS, who had requested permission to observe the battle from the Chaos Theory's bridge,
watched in growing alarm. "Admiral, your ships appear to be scattered."
Confused. How can this possibly be effective against an organized enemy force?
Shen smiled grimly, her scarred face reflecting the tactical display's glow.
Because organized enemy forces have learned to counter organized tactics. Watch their formation.
On the display, the Zarathi fleet had begun to modify its approach. Their perfect geometric pattern was shifting, adapting to counter the expected human defensive strategy. But, as seconds passed and no coherent pattern emerged from the human fleet's movements, something unprecedented began to happen. The Zarathi formation started to fluctuate.
"Incredible," breathed Commander Webb. "Their adaptive algorithms are trying to process 37 different variables simultaneously.
They're designed to identify our tactical pattern and develop countermeasures, but there is no pattern to identify." Individual Zarathi ships began making independent course corrections, each one attempting to respond to the seemingly random human movements near their position. But this created new variables for other ships to respond to, which created more variables, which created an exponentially expanding cascade of adaptive responses.
"They're trying to adapt to chaos itself," Lieutenant Colonel Santos observed with something approaching professional admiration.
"And the more they adapt, the more chaotic their own formation becomes." The first weapons exchange began when a human destroyer, the UEDS Defiance, suddenly accelerated directly at the largest Zarathi vessel and began firing kinetic rounds at targets that seemed to have been selected randomly. To any observer, it appeared to be a suicide run that would accomplish nothing but the destroyer's destruction. But, as the Zarathi ship moved to counter this seemingly suicidal attack, two Council cruisers that had been retreating suddenly reversed course and opened fire on the enemy vessel's exposed flank. The Zarathi ship's adaptive systems, still processing the threat from the destroyer, were caught in the middle of reconfiguring their defensive systems.
For the first time in recorded galactic history, Zarathi shields flickered.
"All units, they're vulnerable during adaptive transitions,"
Shen announced over the fleet communication system. "Hit them while they're changing configurations." What followed was a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen.
Instead of the formal exchanges of fire that characterized traditional space combat, the engagement became a three-dimensional dance of chaos and adaptation. Human ships appeared from unexpected vectors, fired at targets that seemed randomly selected, then vanished before return fire could be coordinated. Council vessels, freed from the constraints of traditional formation fighting, began to remember tactical skills that had been suppressed by millions of years of formal military doctrine. Captains who had spent centuries following precise tactical protocols found themselves improvising, adapting, thinking like the independent predators their species had been before civilization domesticated them. The Zarathi, for their part, were experiencing something they had never encountered in 50,000 years of dormancy and recent awakening. Every time their adaptive systems solved one tactical puzzle, three more would appear. Their perfect coordination began to break down as individual ships started making decisions that contradicted the collective tactical plan. "Zarathi formation coherence is degrading," reported the sensor officer.
"They're showing tactical discord between individual vessels." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the enemy fleet's mathematical precision dissolved into something approaching chaos.
But this wasn't the controlled chaos her forces were employing, this was breakdown, confusion, the failure of systems that had never been designed to cope with tactical insanity.
"Commander Webb, can you get me an analysis of their communication patterns?" Webb's cybernetic interfaces flared as he tapped into the sensor data. Their collective network is experiencing something analogous to a feedback loop.
Too many adaptive solutions are being generated simultaneously, creating conflicts between different tactical algorithms.
They're essentially arguing with themselves.
The moment Chen had been waiting for finally arrived. The Zarathi formation, overwhelmed by conflicting adaptive responses, began to separate into individual units. Their greatest strength, the ability to share tactical innovations instantaneously, had become a weakness when faced with more innovations than their systems could process.
"All units, execute convergence pattern beta. Time to show them what happens when chaos becomes focused."
The scattered human and council forces suddenly revealed the method behind their madness.
Ships that had appeared to be moving randomly were actually positioned at optimal attack vectors around each isolated Zarathi vessel. The chaotic movements had been a setup, a way to separate the enemy without them realizing it until too late. The concentrated firepower that struck each Zarathi ship was devastating, but not because it was more powerful than what they had faced before. It was devastating because it came from directions and, with timing that their adaptive systems hadn't been able to predict or counter. One by one, the geometric nightmares that were Zarathi vessels began to die. Not the clean, efficient deaths that characterized most space combat, but messy, chaotic destructions that resulted from systems failures and adaptive overloads rather than overwhelming firepower. Impossible, whispered Ambassador THYSS, watching as the seemingly invincible enemy force was dismantled by tactics that looked more like controlled insanity than military strategy. Inevitable, Chen corrected. They spent 50,000 years learning to counter organized tactics. But they never learned to counter disorganized ones. The battle's conclusion came not with a final exchange of devastating weapons, but with the sudden retreat of the surviving Zarathi vessels. For the first time since their return, they had encountered an enemy that not only survived their adaptive tactics but turned those same tactics against them. As the enemy ships fled into hyperspace, their perfect formations restored but, their confidence clearly shaken, Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had proven that human tactical doctrine could work against the Zarathi. But this had been a minor engagement, a single battle against an advanced scouting force. The real test was yet to come. Admiral, reported the communications officer, were receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate deployment of human tactical doctrine across all remaining Council fleets. Chen wasn't surprised. Word of their victory would spread quickly through the galactic communication networks, and desperate civilizations would grasp at any strategy that offered hope of survival. What worried her was the scale of what they were being asked to accomplish. "How many fleets are we talking about?" she asked. "Approximately 4,000 ships across 12 star systems," came the reply. 4,000 ships, representing dozens of species with completely different military traditions, evolutionary backgrounds, and technological capabilities. Chen would need to teach them all to fight like humans, to embrace chaos as a weapon, to abandon the formal military doctrines that defined their civilizations, to think like predators from a death world. But, as she looked at the tactical display showing the scattered debris of Zarathi vessels, the first such debris field in galactic history, Admiral Chen felt a grim satisfaction. They had proven it could be done. The galaxy's greatest military powers had learned to fight with mathematical precision and logical strategies. Now it was time to teach them to fight dirty. "Signal all human vessels," she commanded. "We're expanding operations. Every ship commander is now a tactical instructor. We have 6 days to turn the galaxy's remaining fleets into something the Zarathi have never seen before." As the Chaos Theory and its escort fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the Council's main defensive lines, Chen reflected on the irony of their situation. Humanity had been dismissed as primitive, their military technology laughably inferior, their tactical doctrines crude and barbaric. But barbarism, as it turned out, was exactly what the civilized galaxy needed to survive. The Zarathi had spent 50,000 years learning to defeat the finest military minds in galactic history. They were about to discover what happened when they faced the chaotic tactical heritage of a Deathworld species that had never learned to fight fair. The final battle for galactic civilization began not with the thunderous exchange of weapons fire, but with a transmission that would become legend among the surviving species. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Chaos Theory, surrounded by tactical displays showing the largest military formation in galactic history, over 6,000 ships representing the combined might of every surviving civilization, all arranged in patterns that would have horrified military strategists just days before. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen to all fleet commanders," she announced over the communication network that linked human, council, and independent vessels across 12 star systems. "In approximately 1 hour, we're going to face the main Zarathi battle fleet. They outnumber us 4 to 1. Their technology is superior to ours in every measurable way. Their adaptive capabilities have allowed them to defeat every military force they've encountered in 50,000 years. Across the fleet, beings from hundreds of species listened to the humans' words. battle-scarred Valkorian warriors who had escaped their homeworld's destruction. Ancient Zephyrian commanders whose military traditions spanned geological ages. Proud Krulon generals who had never known defeat until the Zarathi came. All of them were about to stake everything on the tactical doctrines of a species they had considered primitive just weeks before. But they've never faced anything like what we become, Chen continued, her voice carrying the confidence that had been earned through blood and chaos. For the past 5 days, you've been learning to fight like humans. To embrace chaos as a weapon. To turn your greatest strength, your ability to adapt and think independently, into something no collective intelligence can counter. On the tactical displays, the approaching Zarathi fleet was a sight that would haunt the nightmares of any survivor. Over 24,000 vessels moved in perfect mathematical precision, their geometric forms creating patterns that seemed to twist space itself. They were the accumulated might of a species that had conquered and absorbed civilizations across half the galaxy, grown strong on the biomass and technology of a billion worlds. But Admiral Chen looked at those terrifying formations and saw something else, the weakness that had allowed humanity to defeat them in smaller engagements. The Zarathi had become too perfect, too coordinated, too dependent on their collective adaptation protocols. They had evolved beyond individual tactical thinking, and that evolution had created a vulnerability that only chaos could exploit. Remember, Chen announced, we're not trying to destroy them through superior firepower. We're trying to break their ability to function as a coordinated force. Every chaotic action you take, every unpredictable maneuver, every tactical decision that violates military logic creates variables their systems can't process efficiently. Lieutenant Colonel Santos, now serving as tactical coordinator for the entire fleet, activated the battle plan they had developed over sleepless days and nights. It wasn't really a plan in any traditional sense, it was more like a framework for controlled chaos, a set of principles that would allow 6,000 ships to fight as independent units while still working toward common objectives. Phase 1 initiating, Santos announced. All units begin random dispersal pattern. Remember, the goal is to look completely disorganized while maintaining optimal tactical positioning. What happened next would have appeared to be the complete breakdown of military discipline to any traditional observer. Ships that had maintained perfect formation began spreading out in patterns that seemed entirely random. Some accelerated toward the enemy, others retreated, and many began moving in seemingly purposeless spirals and curves that defied tactical logic. But, hidden within the apparent chaos was a design that only became clear when viewed from the perspective of mathematical probability. Every ship's seemingly random movement was actually calculated to create maximum uncertainty in Zarathi targeting systems while maintaining optimal positioning for the phases of battle that would follow. Commander Webb, monitoring the Zarathi response from his station aboard the Chaos Theory, reported the first signs of success. Enemy formation is beginning to show adaptive fluctuations. Their targeting systems are trying to predict our movement patterns, but the randomness is causing processing conflicts. Admiral Chen nodded, watching as the perfect geometry of the Zarathi fleet began to show subtle distortions. Individual ships were making micro-adjustments to their positions, each one responding to the tactical variables presented by nearby human and council vessels. But these adjustments created new variables for other ships to respond to, beginning the cascade effect that had proven so effective in smaller engagements. Phase 2, Chen announced. Execute random engagement pattern. The first weapons exchanges began as scattered groups of allied ships suddenly opened fire on Zarathi vessels, but not in any coordinated pattern. Some ships targeted the largest enemy vessels, others focused on smaller craft, and many seemed to select their targets through pure chance. The attacks came from unexpected directions, used unconventional weapon combinations, and followed no discernible tactical logic. To the Zarathi, accustomed to fighting enemies who followed rational military doctrines, the assault was unlike anything their adaptive systems had been designed to counter. Every time they developed a response to one tactical approach, 3 more would appear from completely different directions using entirely different methodologies. Ambassador THYSS, observing from the command center aboard the Council flagship Eternal Harmony, watched in amazement as the battle unfolded. Ships under human tactical doctrine were performing maneuvers that violated everything she understood about space combat, yet somehow they were achieving tactical objectives that seemed impossible. How are they doing this? She asked General Korth,
who was studying the battle data with expressions that cycled between confusion and wonder. "I believe," Korth replied slowly, "they're fighting multiple battles simultaneously. Look at the tactical patterns, they're not executing one coordinated strategy. They're executing hundreds of independent strategies that somehow combine into a coherent assault." The breakthrough came when a group of modified Council destroyers, operating under the call-sign Chaos Pack 7, managed to penetrate the Zarathi defensive perimeter through a series of maneuvers that seemed to violate physics. They had approached their target by flying in apparently random vectors that constantly changed, making it impossible for enemy targeting systems to predict their course. When they finally opened fire, it wasn't with the concentrated barrage that Zarathi defenses were designed to counter. Instead, they used a technique that human tacticians had dubbed shotgun diplomacy, dozens of different weapons fired in seemingly random patterns that created overlapping fields of destruction rather than focused attack points. The target, a massive Zarathi command vessel that had been successfully adapting to every previous assault, found its defensive systems overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of the attack. For the second time in galactic history, Zarathi shields failed completely, and the command vessel was destroyed. But the real victory wasn't the destruction of a single ship, it was what that destruction did to the Zarathi fleet's coordination. The loss of the command vessel created a gap in their collective intelligence network, forcing other ships to compensate by increasing their own adaptive processing. This additional load, combined with the ongoing chaos of the battle, began to strain the Zarathi fleet's most fundamental advantage. "Zarathi formation coherence is degrading significantly," reported Webb, his cybernetic interfaces now fully integrated with the fleet's sensor network. "Their collective adaptation protocols are experiencing cascade failures. Too many variables, too many conflicting solutions." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the mathematical perfection of the Zarathi fleet began to break down. Ships were starting to operate independently, making tactical decisions that conflicted with the collective strategy. Their greatest strength was becoming their greatest weakness. All units, Phase 3. Execute convergence pattern. This was the moment that the entire battle had been building toward. Ships that had appeared to be scattered randomly across the battlefield suddenly revealed their true positions. The chaotic movements of the previous phases had actually been a massive setup, positioning Allied forces at optimal attack vectors around every major Zarathi vessel. The concentrated assault that followed was devastating not because of its raw power, but because of its perfect timing and coordination. Thousands of ships opened fire simultaneously from directions that the Zarathi adaptive systems hadn't predicted, using tactics that their collective intelligence couldn't counter quickly enough to matter. But the Zarathi were not defenseless. Even as their coordination broke down, individual ships remained incredibly dangerous. Their weapons still unmade matter at the quantum level, their armor still deflected attacks that would destroy conventional vessels. The battle became a titanic struggle between organized chaos and adaptive lethality. Ships died on both sides in numbers that would be counted in the histories as among the greatest losses in galactic warfare. But, for every human or council vessel that fell, 2 Zarathi ships were destroyed or disabled. The Deathworld tactics that had seemed so primitive were proving superior to 50,000 years of military evolution. The turning point came when Commander Santos, coordinating the battle from her position aboard the tactical command ship UEDS Pandemonium, made a decision that would have been considered insane by any traditional military standard. Seeing that a group of Zarathi superdreadnoughts was beginning to re-establish coordination, she ordered a direct assault by the smallest ships in the fleet. "All fighter squadrons and escort vessels, target the superdreadnoughts. Execute kamikaze protocols if necessary." What followed was a charge that would be remembered as one of the most heroic actions in galactic history. Hundreds of small vessels, many of them barely larger than shuttlecraft, accelerated directly at enemy ships that outmassed them by factors of thousands. They had no hope of survival, no chance of penetrating the superdreadnought's defenses through conventional means. But they weren't using conventional means. The small ships carried experimental weapons that human engineers had developed during the frantic days of preparation, devices that didn't try to overwhelm Zarathi defenses but instead created quantum instabilities that spread through the enemy ship's adaptive systems like viruses.
Each successful hit didn't just damage the target, it introduced chaotic elements into their most fundamental systems.
The super dreadnoughts, faced with quantum viruses that their adaptive protocols couldn't classify or counter, began to experience system-wide failures. Ships that had been invincible for 50,000 years found their own adaptive capabilities turning against them as the viral chaos spread through their collective network. "Zarathi fleet is beginning full retreat," announced the sensor officer, his voice filled with disbelief.
"Repeat, the Zarathi main battle fleet is retreating."
Admiral Chen watched as the geometric nightmares that had terrorized the galaxy began to withdraw, their perfect formations restored but their invincibility shattered forever. They had encountered something their 50,000 years of evolution hadn't prepared them for, an enemy that fought with organized chaos, that turned weakness into strength, that refused to play by the rules that govern civilized warfare. As the last Zarathi vessels disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind debris fields that marked the graves of both civilizations, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of exhausted satisfaction. They had done something that the greatest military minds in galactic history had declared impossible. They had defeated the Zarathi horde. But the victory had come at a cost that would be counted for generations. Over 1,500 Allied ships had been destroyed, representing hundreds of thousands of lives from dozens of species. The techniques that had proven so effective against the Zarathi could never be used again. The enemy would adapt, learn, develop counters to chaos itself. "Admiral," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Worlds that had gone silent are coming back online. The Zarathi retreat appears to be universal." Chen nodded, understanding the implications. The Zarathi were not destroyed, they had simply been forced to retreat, to reconsider their approach, to adapt to the new reality of an enemy that could counter their adaptive capabilities. They would return, probably within decades, with new strategies designed to counter human tactical doctrine. But, for now, galactic civilization had survived. The accumulated knowledge, art, and culture of 1,000 species would continue. And the galaxy had learned something important about the quiet species from the Deathworld, that sometimes survival required not the perfection of civilization, but the controlled barbarism of beings who had never forgotten how to fight dirty. As the combined fleet began the long journey home, Admiral Chen reflected on the irony that had saved galactic civilization. The most primitive military force in the galaxy had defeated its most advanced enemy by refusing to fight like civilized beings. Humanity had taught the galaxy that sometimes, the best defense against overwhelming force was not better armor or more powerful weapons. Sometimes, it was simply the willingness to embrace chaos as a weapon and fight like the predators they had always been beneath the veneer of civilization. The galaxy would remember the day when the Deathworld species answered their call for help. And the Zarathi, when they returned, would face an enemy that had learned to fight like humans, chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly undefeated.